However, I guarantee you would not have pulled over either. And in fact, we were just
I'm
telling
not 71-year-old good communicator with no ego.
I was just hearing a story from you last night about your dad who was driving a car in the torrential rain with no windshield wipers, and he has his arm out the window manually.
First off,
reality therapist perception.
Hello, and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero, and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I am not Catherine. I am also not a therapist. I am, however, a husband who has some strong opinions.
Yes, which I'm really excited to get into this week. We have a part A, which is what you're watching now, all about Golden Bachelor. And part B this week will be about Bachelor in Paradise, season 9, episode 2. But before we get into this week's episode, really just wanted to extend a big thank you to you who's watching this. And if you're listening to my voice right now, it would mean the world to me, to us, if you could hit that thumbs up, that like button, and also subscribe to our channel. It is a small thing that actually goes a really, really long way.
And don't forget to hit the bell icon so that you will know anytime new content gets posted to this channel.
Yes, we have so much more coming your way, so you want to stay tuned. Okay, you ready to get into it?
I am.
All right, so we are here today talking about Golden Bachelor, season 1, episode 2. And yeah, I cried the entire time.
It was an interesting episode. You know, I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but I really wanted to see the dynamics and how they were going to play out with an older group of individuals. We've talked a lot about the conversations. Are they going to be deep, or are they going to be a little bit more surface level? And there were some really, really interesting, deep conversations. Definitely a lot of emotion. And I really kind of liked some of the stuff we saw. There's some stuff I didn't like necessarily, but I think that the amount I liked far outweighed the amount that I disliked in this episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the thing that I also really like and appreciate about this show is it's only its full runtime is 45 minutes, and they pack so much in. So it feels like every moment in this show counts, which I feel like is such a strong parallel to how Gerry and these women are also approaching their love journey, not here to waste time, making it all count. So I kind of love what we're seeing so far and the format that we're seeing it in.
Yeah, I agree.
So before we get into kind of the meat of this episode, let's do a quick overview of what we saw. So the ladies move into the mansion, which I wasn't really sure if they were going to do that, but they do. The first date card of the season gets dropped, and Teresa and Gerry go on a one-on-one. Then we get our first group date of the season, which is a romantic photo shoot. And then we close up with a birthday party for Gerry, as well as our second rose ceremony.
Yeah, I have to say the mansion, not very mansiony. Why are 60-plus-year-old individuals being dropped into bunk beds? I was not expecting that. So that kind of caught me a little bit off guard. Is that normal?
Well, as part of all Bachelor, Bachelorette seasons, yeah, the bunk beds are a thing. The women contestants, the men contestants, they share rooms. It's like camp. And, in part B, in Bachelor in Paradise, we don't even see this as commentary. Their living conditions are way worse than what we're seeing.
That beach is hideous as far as paradise beaches go.
It's not very paradise.
Not very paradise, yeah.
But yeah, so this is very, very typical for a Bachelor season. But I'm with you, that they subjected these poor women who are in their 60s and above to these kinds of living conditions. I literally just went on a bachelorette party that there were 7 of us, and I refused to share a room with anybody. And so, and these women have years and years on me. And so one of them, Ellen, had said, it's really hard to put, women of this age in a situation like this, because you are so used to your own ways, and having to adapt and adjust to a different way of living and such small quarters is a challenge in and of itself. But I imagine they do that again to increase the drama of the situation. But that sucks. I felt really bad.
I love that they were negotiating the midnight pee schedule. That was the most interesting kind of part of all that.
Well, the thing that I just appreciated about it, again, as a bachelorette viewer, is that commentary is not at all present for the women or the men when they're in their 20s or 30s as part of the conversation.
So now, do you even see that in other seasons or not really?
See them moving into
sure, yeah.
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
You see, and it looks like torture. So I liked that. In the typical seasons of the franchise, it's just this accepted thing, this is what we sign up for.
Mm-hmm.
And that this was even brought to the forefront of oh my gosh, we're going to be living like this again, spoke to age and maturity. And again, as Ellen said, when you grow up, there are certain things that you get used to and you don't really essentially want to tolerate anymore. Mm-hmm. But they all were really good sports about it, which was cool. I would not be.
Yes, I know. We're definitely, when we travel, we're definitely an upgrade the room type of couple. Mm-hmm. We, no bunk beds involved.
Then we kind of quickly move into Jesse enters into the mansion and he drops the first date card. The women are like, what is this? What are we supposed to do with it? Are you going to open it? Which I also thought was really funny because it's sort of known on Bachelor, Bachelorette, Jesse just drops the card and leaves and you all disperse and figure out who's going to open it. So I liked that they, again, elevated the commentary of why don't you just open it, Jesse?
There's also a genuineness to this whole thing. Maybe you are actually here. I just find that really interesting and a little bit refreshing.
It was endearing.
Yeah.
It was sweet to see. And so the first date goes to Teresa.
Which, if you recall from last episode, I said I thought Teresa was second to Faith. I said I thought she was a distant second, but I thought clear as day, she was the one that if I were Gerry, I would have probably picked her for the first date as well. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Which does beg the question for those of us who are new to the Bachelor Nation. How much say does Gerry get in who goes on these dates?
It's unclear. I feel like I can't answer that question truthfully. It's unclear. I think the show wants us to believe that the lead has a lot of say in who gets chosen and what they do, and it's unclear how
the reality is if the lead had full discretion, it probably would become a much more boring show. Mm-hmm. The producers need to maintain some level of discretion to gin up certain levels of drama as required by the TV show. Mm-hmm. I mean, I thought that she was a predictable pick, but also the pick that I was hoping to see, because I thought that was the connection that was the distant second to Faith, and the one that was most interesting, I thought, to go and explore. Mm-hmm. And I loved the conversations. I loved kind of the way that they both approached it. It was heartbreaking to hear them talk about how they both have become widows. It got me thinking about conversations you and I have a lot. Like you and I will constantly say to each other, I want to die first, and you're like, no. I'm dying first. And, we kind of banter back and forth about that. But this episode actually really got me thinking, because are you crying? I haven't even said the sweet thing yet. Oh, you're crying over them. You don't care about my sweet thing.
Well, it's all of it. I mean, I literally have tears forming in my eyes.
5 minutes into the episode.
But seriously, it was really, really emotional.
It was very touching. Yeah. Well, I was saying, so, I got to thinking about, our banter back and forth. And I do truly like when I say I want to die first, I oftentimes, I mean that. I say that often because I really can't conceive of what life would be like without you. And it really just feels like it would be miserable. And then you watch Gerry and Teresa talk about it. And it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly why I say, like, I want to die first. But then when you have a second to sort of step back and watch the grief that they go through, you realize, like, maybe I actually do want you to die first. Hear me out, because I really don't want you to feel that level of grief. And that's what really struck me was, wow, they really did grieve hard. And that really was very touching about how they talked about their grief and how they got over it, and how I'm starting to rethink. I don't want you to die. Please don't die. But I started to rethink, like, my entire perspective on wanting to be the one to die first, because I definitely don't want you to go through that type of grief. So it put me into this weird emotional state where now I don't know what I feel about that entire perspective of things. But love the conversations. Again, we talk about the disparity, the juxtaposition between Paradise conversations or just regular Bachelorette conversations and these conversations. And I mean, I think if there's any better piece of evidence or any better example of what we're talking about, I don't think that there is. This is life experience, real, true life experience, real, deep, meaningful conversations being had. Not your favorite color.
Right. Yeah, the thing that I loved was they both had a similar experience with their spouse dying relatively suddenly, and the shock and the tragedy of just that. And one thing that Gerry said that really stuck with me and struck me was, he said, whenever I tell the story of how Tony died, I can't tell it without crying. But now I feel like, in hearing what Teresa had to say, like, I don't have that sadness. I more feel this level of being understood. And I thought that was so meaningful, because oftentimes what comes up when people are processing their grief is how alone it feels. And part of it is because grief is different for everyone. There isn't one way to grieve. Even Teresa and Gerry, while they had like a similar-ish experience of, tragic sudden loss of their spouse, I'm sure their grief journeys were different. But being able to see themselves in one another, being able to see similarities in one another, and having actual true empathy for one another, that is so rare and must feel so comforting when processing grief, again, because it's typically a very lonely process. And Gerry also highlighted, like, I have great friends. We've seen his relationships, with his daughters and granddaughters, and like, that is meaningful. But there is something just about, like, really feeling seen and understood in tragedy and sadness and grief. And so it's not surprising that their connection also deepened there, because it is such a very unique experience. We're missing a really, really meaningful part of the date, which was their ride there.
Oh yeah, I do want to touch on that. Your thoughts on that, because I had a lot of, I would say I had a lot of questions about how that should have been handled, and I'm really interested to get your take. But what were your thoughts?
Well, first we were watching it together, and I had said to you, like, this is making me feel so anxious that on their ride there, Gerry's headlights aren't working or stop functioning. I'm not sure. It was unclear.
My first question was, is this his real car?
No.
Because if it's not his real car, then the producers did him dirty.
Yeah, that was also my question. Like, where's production? Like, this is so unsafe.
It's very unsafe. Yeah.
And then I noticed, like, what was coming up for me was, like, feeling, and maybe this is like a little bit of ageism in me, but there was this feeling of, like, oh my gosh, these like older people, they're so vulnerable and they're like in a new and strange place. And I was like feeling very, very anxious about them being in this situation. And it was clear that Gerry also was feeling a little stressed. He also had talked about him feeling stressed about his first date, which was kind of also really nice to hear. Like, no matter where you are on the age spectrum, like first dates are nerve-wracking and stressful. Like that doesn't necessarily change over time. But so his emotions and stress level is already high. And then this happens, driving on an unfamiliar road, unfamiliar highway. LA traffic is a mess. And
possibly in an unfamiliar vehicle.
Probably,
yeah.
I would say probably in an unfamiliar vehicle. And so what I loved, and he commented on it too, is that Teresa was so encouraging and saying like, you're doing okay. And then she put her hand on his shoulder just quietly, and how like calming and comforting and soothing that was. And he commented on that later, like, like I really needed that. And I just thought like that is the stuff of maturity. And again, people who understand emotions and relationships and connections. And that honestly was one of my favorite like micro moments of the entire episode. Just this.
Yeah. My first response though was Teresa handled it like an absolute champ. And she was so good. And I thought that he did a really good job of being very communicative. He let her know there's a problem. I'm a little worried about it. I think I can handle it. And so we're just gonna, we're gonna keep going on and on. But please, basically saying to her, please be aware that there's a problem. I think I can handle the problem. But just be aware I am a little concerned. And I do think that's just shows, it demonstrates great humility and communication skills. A lot of guys are not going to tell a girl, especially on a first date, that there's a problem. They're going to just muscle through, right? You have basically two types of guys. The ones that will just collapse into a puddle, and the others that are just going to just plow right through and not even let the person know. And those are both acts of immaturity. And here you saw ego. Yeah. Then my kind of next response was, did Gerry and Teresa actually handle this correctly? How scary was this situation and how dangerous was it? Should Gerry, and I really want your opinion on this, should Gerry have said, I don't have headlights, I am concerned, and the risk, while I don't think I'm going to crash this car, I'm not going to take that chance with your life. So I'm going to pull over and I'm going to, get on the phone and make sure that these headlights are fixed before we continue to date. And inversely, should Teresa have said, Gerry, I know you think you can handle this. I have confidence that you can, but I don't want to take the chance. Let's just pull over. It's not a big deal. I've got all night with you. What would your thoughts be?
I mean, I was shocked he didn't pull over.
I was shocked he did not pull over.
One more thing, you're bringing up communication a lot, and I just wanted to also highlight something from their date, which was that the communication and vulnerability. Teresa comes right out and says, I really like you. And like Catherine and I on Reactivity TV all the time, I referenced this last week, talk about vulnerability and like this fake vulnerability we typically see on the show. That is vulnerable. That I loved. Like she just came out and she was the one who said like, we don't have time to waste. Like, I'm not here to waste time. Like, I feel this way. I'm going to say it. And that I also loved that it brought them like, gosh, how close they were able to get in this short period of time just by being honest, being vulnerable, and communicating.
So I love that you brought up vulnerability. I was actually going to bring it up later, and basically, with the same sort of sentiment. I thought the Nancy thing, without speeding ahead too much, that to me demonstrated what real vulnerability is. And I love that. And similar, I agree with you, Teresa. There was a level of vulnerability there, but I thought the Nancy stuff later was a really, really great demonstration of what true vulnerability is.
Oh yeah. Well, let's get into that part. So that happens on the group date. The thing that I didn't love, just from a viewer perspective, is typically we get a group date card, and so we know which women are on the group date. And
I was going to ask, did I miss that?
No, I didn't see one. They just kind of like went
straight into
straight
it.
into
It wasn't
the
clear
group date.
who was there and who wasn't.
Right. So it appeared that not everyone was on the group date, but that wasn't like very overtly obvious.
Yeah.
And so on the group date, we have Franco, the photographer, back.
Who is Franco? He's an icon. And I wrote in my notes, like, why is he an icon? Who is he?
So he's just been like kind of a permanent fixture on the show for the last several seasons.
Is he the Wells of The Bachelor? No, we're not still. Okay.
Different, same, but different. And just like they find a way to include him nearly every season, again, for the last handful of seasons, as like the photographer. Having a photo shoot for a group date is like very typical Bachelor. So he's like the resident photographer, group date photographer for the Bachelor franchise.
Okay. And how do you feel about a photography date in a group setting like that?
So like on a big level, I hate it. I think it's stupid.
Yep.
And I like, it doesn't actually bring connections, but what I like about it, from like, again, we talked about this a lot, especially on part B of Reactivity TV last week as it related to Bachelor in Paradise. But I like it as a way to assess qualities and characteristics about potential partners. And so like, are you going to like just jump into this and like get silly and just like roll with it? Like, how flexible are you? How adaptable are you? Can you just like be goofy and have fun? And so there's like several things to be paying attention to. Like as an assessment in terms of like a prospective life partner. But other than that, I just think I would hate to be on this date.
Yeah, I don't love it. I think that, I want dates where there's good opportunities for communicating. This is why like bowling is a terrible early date. As much as I love to bowl, it's a terrible early date because you're constantly switching back and forth. And even if you're there with 4 or 6 people, your turn just comes up so quickly, right? And I feel like kind of this photo shoots kind of get that same sort of problem where you're in, you're out, you're posing. Like you're not like, hey, like we're cuddled up, like having this picture, having a conversation. So it just, I don't know what it really adds to building a connection. I think I agree with you. You can use it sort of as a metric for potentially weeding people out. But I don't see it as an opportunity really to build a rapport with somebody. So Gerry gave Ellen a photo from this photo shoot. How did you feel about that?
I was kind of surprised. And I was not, I guess I was kind of wondering why her specifically, considering he took photos with however many other women. So it's meaningful that he made, it was a gesture. And so I guess what I'm inferring is that is a connection that's special to him. And he wanted to make sure that she knew that, even if they didn't get as much like time to connect that day.
She's wearing a wedding dress. And do you really want a picture of you in a wedding dress with somebody that, may or may not work out? It's just like a weird thing.
You're bringing us right to the Nancy portion of this date in that, wearing a wedding dress has meaning, particularly if you've worn one before. And we see Nancy get really, really affected and emotional putting on a wedding dress for the second time in her life. And she starts to say, this is taking me by such surprise. This is so unexpected that I'm feeling this way. Thinking about the first time I was in a wedding dress, it was the best day of my life when I married my husband. And so all of those memories are coming back, and, she's missing her husband who died, I think 12 years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
And that also got me choked up because I was thinking about you and us. And actually today, that we're recording, we've been together for 15 years. And these people have been with their significant others significantly longer than we have. And it just like gutted me to think about being in her shoes.
Yeah, I thought the Nancy thing, as I said earlier, demonstrated true vulnerability. I loved that Gerry recognized that there was a problem. I loved that he pulled her aside and had a conversation.
Gerry took it personally.
I was going to get to that. I don't know that he took it personally. In sort of the face to camera, he said, I don't know if I did something, if it's something in the house, if it's something to the girls, if it's something personal.
He said to her, I feel like there's a disconnect here.
I do feel like what he said in the face to camera and what he said to her, the face to camera was better articulated.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you there. This is probably the first time that I've seen Gerry say something where I'm like, that was not his best, the best articulation of something that Gerry has attempted to say. Generally, he's really, really on point. It's difficult because you don't know when the face to camera happens with respect to the actual interaction with the individual. We've seen the edited version. But I do like that they had a conversation. And I do really like how she responded. I thought in many ways, Nancy demonstrated real, true vulnerability. I loved how Gerry responded to that. Well, I didn't like the way he opened that conversation. I do like the way he responded, where I understand, I sympathize.
I have a slightly different take on this. So I loved that she was so vulnerable, so honest with him and telling this story. What did Gerry do? As you're saying, in turn, he shared, like, this reminds me of when this happened to me, something similar happened to me. And in some ways, that's a really cheap way of demonstrating empathy. And depending on the state that the original teller is in, that might be seen as incredibly invalidating and might be seen as, okay, you're turning this around and making it about you. And sometimes people insert those stories because they're really uncomfortable with what was just shared and they don't really know how to respond. And so they're trying to find a way to say, I understand, or I've been there, or you're not alone, by sharing this other story. But it's kind of a little bit like a cheat, and it doesn't always land well. And so I'm always really, really cautious about that, because sometimes it feels a little bit like the trauma Olympics. Like there's some one-upsmanship. Yeah.
This reminds me of early in our relationship when you would have a problem and I would try and console you, and you would tell me I was consoling you wrong.
I think you still do.
I just probably still do. I'm getting better, but that happens. Or like I remember there was one time I said, I don't remember even what it was about, but it was like, this happens to everybody. It's just one of those things. And you just turn to me and be like, I do not want to hear how I am the same as everybody else right now. I want to stew in my uniqueness of my complaint, whatever it was. And I just always remember that is being like, okay, I got a lot to learn about women and about being in a relationship, because I didn't see that. I thought I was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
completely wrong.
It's such it's in some ways like a real big misconception about vulnerability and empathy, because while again, I'm not necessarily being critical of Gerry, but their interaction is something that happens so often in life. And so, like, yes, Gerry's story was incredibly vulnerable. It made sense that he shared it then. It was an effort to connect with her and help her feel understood. But the actual vulnerable thing would have been to say something like, gosh, like, that sounds so difficult. Like, I'm here with you in that. To not offer an anecdote, to not offer a solution, to sit with the discomfort of, holy shit, like, this is really hard what this woman just told me. She's going through a hard time, and just owning that you can't fix it and you can't, anecdote it away. That's the actual vulnerable thing, is to show up without a solution, but just sitting next to her in the deep dark, rather than essentially like throwing her a line to get out.
So let me ask you now, in that situation, you say sit with her in it. But what does that look like to the average person without training in mental and behavioral health. Like, I have to say something. I can't just sit there and just awkwardly be like, they're there. I understand.
See, but you're making it about you.
Well, no, but my question really is like, there has to be like just sitting there and not saying anything is going to be is going. So like, where is the line between I am being comforting and I'm providing real empathy and not making it about me, not worrying about my own discomfort. How is that line? Because if I can't tell an anecdote and I also, can't be like, oh, I totally understand, because that's probably not affirming. What do I say?
It's a good question, because I think we, again, as therapists, kind of use this like lingo and expect people to understand it. Like feeling your feelings is like a real misunderstood concept of like, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? This is another one of those of like, yeah, what does it mean to sit with someone like when they're going through a difficult time? Sometimes it is just providing a like validating statement, or a statement that demonstrates that you can see how difficult this could be for them, that you understand, like that you can see, like visibly see, like Nancy, I can tell like how difficult this must be for you, to kind of reflect that back. I think you can ask, and this is something actually with my clinical supervisor and we've sort of talked a little bit about, where you can sort of ask and say, I actually have had an experience that is reminding me of what you shared. Do you mind if I tell you about that?
Would it be helpful if I told you about it, or something like that? Like,
would that be something that you want to hear?
Option,
yeah,
to opt in or out, and then maybe an obligation to say yes, but you've at least expressed some, you've basically given them a way to say opt out, or show that I'm trying to do this not because of my own discomfort, because I think it might be helpful to you by me telling the story.
Right.
And so even though you're ultimately doing the same thing, you've prepped it in such a way where you've identified and specified why you're telling it, and you're being a little more intentional,
right?
And that intentionality, is makes a big difference.
One thing that we've talked about on our Wishing You Well podcast, Catherine and I, is like, when it comes to relationships, it's not actually about the golden rule of treat others how you want to be treated. It's more about the platinum rule, treat others the way that they want to be treated. And so like, it's also meaningful and helpful to just ask someone like, how can I support you right now? Like, what do you need from me? Do you want to just sit here? Do you want to change the subject? Do you want to keep talking about this? Do you want to talk about whatever, something different? So I think it's okay to, again, give the person a choice in what happens next.
So going back to Nancy, she did receive the date rose. I want to get your thoughts on it. I thought that this was super predictable. I thought that Gerry basically, his arm was twisted into this. I don't think he had any choice, just given the events that unfolded. Do I think that she necessarily deserved it? Whatever the word deserve means. She wouldn't have been my pick, but I don't think that he really had any other choice in this situation.
Yeah, it wasn't surprising either. What was surprising was he broke format. When there's a group date rose, typically like everyone is sitting all together and you pick up the rose and you present the rose in front of the whole group.
Well, he didn't do that last week either.
Well, that was first impression rose. You don't do that.
That
is typically a more like individual thing.
Understood. Okay.
But the group date rose, I thought like, what a guy, that Gerry. And I liked that he explained to her why she was receiving it, similar to what he did last week with Faith. And so I thought that was a nice touch, that he pulled her to the side and presented her with the rose because of like their connection and their vulnerability their shared vulnerability. I if it was going to go to anyone other than Nancy, I thought it could have gone to Leslie. It seemed like they had a deeper connection. And there was more to Leslie than we saw last week. We were both quite critical of her. And it seems like she might get that kind of feedback a lot, that she, presents as this one way on the surface, but, underneath what she said, she's like a lava cake. She's like, gooey on the inside. So that was nice to see. I appreciated that.
Yeah. So Leslie, I thought was interesting here. A bit of a roller coaster for me. I thought she had some highlights. I thought that when she had some time alone with Gerry, we definitely saw a side of her that was a little bit deeper than we'd seen in the past. That being said, I thought we saw some serious cattiness from her as well. So I just don't know where we're at. I do think that their interaction together was certainly it went better than I was kind of expecting it to go. So I could have seen her getting the rose as well. But I think that had Nancy not broken down the way she did, I think it probably would have gone in that direction. I'm still a seller of Leslie, but she had, I think, certainly a better week this week than she had last week, from my perspective.
No, I think so too. So let's move to the last part of the episode, which was Gerry's birthday. And instead of a cocktail party, the women threw him a birthday party, which was really sweet. And that led later into the rose ceremony. So what stuck out to you from that chunk of the afternoon, evening?
What stuck out to me, not necessarily pertinent to anything other than April just keeps growing on me more and more. She was playing around with the wiener jokes and stuff like that, and I was just watching her. I'm like, this is my mother right here, and it just touched home for me, because it's like I get her, I understand her. And do I think that she's gonna win this? No, I don't. But you know what? She's just, when I first saw her, I was so I know this isn't for me. And every time I see her, I enjoy her more and more and more. And
she's my favorite.
She's so fun.
April for Golden Bachelorette. Let's do this. She would give us a great show.
Yeah. It really, I like her. Other I think notable things, we saw some real insecurity from Faith. Kind of a little surprised, because it's only been a couple of days. You got the first impression rose. Obviously you're not going to get the one-on-one date, right? You've already made the impression. He's got to explore the other things per the parameters of the show. Not everyone's going on the group date, so obviously I would expect that you'd be the one left out. I would expect that. I don't know if she was the only one left out. It's unclear. There was a lot of women at the group date, but yeah, I thought those were the two noteworthy things. It was that insecurity. It was like, let's pump the brakes a second here. It's been a couple of days and you got the first impression rose,
Right. What I will say is the first impression rose can go either way. What we've seen from the women, from bachelorettes, is typically the first impression rose ends up being the winner, or in the top 4. So they tend to go a long way. With the men, not as much.
That doesn't surprise me, actually.
And what we've heard some of the bachelors say, when they've been sending the first impression rose winner home at some point during their season, is, initially I had all this confidence in our connection, and so I focused on building other connections, and then our connection kind of fell to the wayside. There's kind of this overconfidence in this connection, and then you explore other options. And so
it's a very classic male thing. Men are significantly more object oriented than women, and oftentimes it's what's in front of us is what we're dealing with. Men multitask significantly worse than women for a variety of anthropological reasons. And so it's not shocking that men are very bad at handling multiple things at one time, right? And so that doesn't surprise me at all.
So then we get into the rose ceremony, and sort of not surprisingly, Leslie gets the first rose. The roses do have the order of the roses do have some significance typically. So it's really meaningful that Leslie got the first rose. for the most part, who stayed and who went wasn't super surprising. But we're really flying through this
He basically
season.
cut 7 people in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we said at the top, not here to waste time, so getting right down to it. But the teaser for the rest of the season looks like we're going to get some drama. So I'm here for it. I'm excited to see.
Any other last thoughts before we get out of here?
We're not done. We have part B to talk about. We have Bachelor in Paradise to talk about.
Specifically about Gerry.
No, I'm in it to win it for Gerry.
All right. So Rose and Thorn.
Okay. I'll start with my Thorn.
Mm-hmm.
It was the lack of headlights, that whole situation that was really, really stressful.
But who's the Thorn go? Does it go to
it goes
production?
To the producers.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Protect Gerry, please, at all costs.
So what's your Rose for this episode?
I think you sort of just talked about it, April. She was like such a nice comic relief. No, I take that back. I mean, yes, April as the Rose, but in the outtakes credits, we had Natasha get right up in the screen.
That was hilarious.
And she was asking for chair rose ceremony. Yeah. And I just thought that was great. I mean, again, these are two like moments of levity, which I felt like I really needed in such an emotional episode. So between Natasha and April, they both get my roses for this week, just for like them, like their vivaciousness, their energy. I mean, it was great. It was needed too.
Yeah, no, I get that. I thought that was really, really funny as well. I'm not a big fan of Natasha, just not my cup of tea. I don't like that big boisterous personality. But I think that was hilarious. So I think my Rose goes, it's going to go to Teresa. I liked her in episode 1, hated her limo intro, but like really liked the cupcake stuff going on. And I think she demonstrated that she's a very strong contender here. And I thought the date was great. I thought the way she handled the driving situation was great. Yeah, I'm in on her. I actually really like her. Thorn. There wasn't a lot that I didn't like about the entire episode, except for those bunk beds. I mean, those bunk beds are brutal. Yeah. And I mean, some of these ladies are in their 70s. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't be putting 70-year-old women in bunk beds. Mm-hmm. Like, come on. Like,
they're small beds.
They're small. They deserve a bed on the floor. Okay. Ground level. All right.
That's fair. Yeah. I'm with you. All right. So that wraps us up for this week's episode of The Golden Bachelor. And then we will be back with a part B for Bachelor in Paradise episode 2. So we will see you there. And again, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. And yeah, we'll be back next week with more Golden Bachelor. See you then.
See ya.
Bye.